In 2025, she accepted early career academic award from the Australian Teacher Education Association. And with her strong academic background and extensive experience in education and language teaching, we are very pleased and honored to have Dr. Tanya Kwee with us today. So please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Tanya. So Dr. Tanya, whenever you're ready, the Zoom is yours.
Thank you very much, Susie, for introducing me, and also, thank you so much for IC, Dr. Rahman, and also, Dr. Fernandez for inviting me too. Okay, before I begin, so may I just try to share, my slides to see if it works. I hope that IT is with me today. So can we see our slides? Okay, so give me a thumb up if it is okay.
Okay.
Right, so awesome. Okay, so thank you so much. Okay, so and if there's any moment that the audio is so muffled, unclear, or there's glitching, so please give a shout, and then I will just repeat some of the points there. Right. So once again, so selamat pagi. So good morning, everyone. So and thank you very much for inviting. Me to join the colleagues here in universities of Bengkulu. And also, so as I have mentioned, so I also say a huge thanks to the so faculty members for inviting me. And today, so I'm going to speak about the teacher professional development for culturally responsive English language teaching. And first of all, I also like briefly talk about who am I. So as so Susie has already introduced me. So I'm a lecturer in the School of Education at University of New South Wales, Sydney, Australia. And before I joined UNSW, I worked as a language teacher in both Hong Kong and Australia. And mostly my research focus area is on culturally and linguistically diverse teachers, as well as teacher professional development. And I'm curious about practice-oriented language education. So this background actually helped me to shape the approach that we do, so towards cultural responsiveness, both as a learner issue and also together as a teacher learning issue. So once is that, so today I would like to organize this keynote lecture around one question. So what capacities should professional learning develop if we want EL teachers to become more culturally responsive? So the framing of this question is deliberate. So I'm not asking only about culturally responsive teaching. What is it? Right. Of course, the definition matters. Right. But teacher can know about the definition without so changing what's happening in the classroom. So as you listen, I would love to invite you to think over one perspective of your own teaching or within the teacher education. Where is there already awareness? And then where is the movement into practice still incomplete or in between? Right. And we'll return to this question at the end. I will use the culturally responsive education as an umbrella orientation. So first of all, so culturally responsive education, because it's that we recognize and value what learners bring. So for example, languages, identity, knowledge, and also experiences. So which means that we treat these resources as assets that could actively contribute to learning rather than the differences that we have to overcome. Right. Second is that we maintain high expectations while also making curricula and interactional demands accessible. So what do we mean here is that responsiveness is therefore not just about lowering the standard, right? But that so that is the thing that we do to ensure that the learner have meaningful opportunities and appropriate support to meet them. So it brings into the third question that we need to think over. It's about what has been normalized there, what has been taken for granted. So for example, whose English, whose knowledge, or whose way of participation that counts as competent, right? So all these bring together, so actually requires teachers to examine how taken for granted norms may privilege a particular linguistic, cultural, or interactional practice over the others. So when we are looking into that, okay, so these three commitments, they are not three separate techniques. So we are not offering like, okay, so a handy technique workshop here. Okay, so but that actually it frames how teachers interpret learners and classroom events. And together, as we mentioned, so it brings in the orientation to make a pedagogical decision that could be actually both academically demanding and responsive to the learners in front of us. So that's why being a teacher is actually not an easy job today. So just now, as we have mentioned, that culturally responsive ELT is not a bag of technique or that we draw a point and then just strictly apply it. So there is no one size fits all solution, right? So it is also not a accumulation of cultural facts as well, right? So an example, knowing a list of festival or communication styles can be so even become more stereotyping when teachers applied it mechanically. So instead, so cultural responsiveness is a kind of professional judgment that we make. So it is a capacity that we build to interpret learners, language, and context critically, and to notice what matters in a particular situation, to make, test, and revise pedagogical decisions. A technique can be copied, right? But judgment requires teachers to interpret a context and select among the alternatives and accept the responsibility for such consequence. And the same strategy actually could be responsive in one classroom, but might be unhelpful in another one. It really depends on the learner's purpose and implementation. So simply said, so this kind of capacity is not like a software that we install into teachers' mind in one single short workshop, but instead so it develops through sustained and practice-based professional learning. And this is the logic of the model in the next slide. So here, so I propose to use this simple cycle to explain this kind of capacity. So it is not intended to be a definitive model of culturally responsive teaching, but we should see it as a way that we think through what professional learning might need to be getting supported. So we will first, starting from the box, and the top, which is about seeing. So we need to see about what assumptions shape our understanding of language, learners, and cultures. And then we move to the second one on the left-hand side, or actually our right-hand side. So if we move on to noticing. So what actually happens for the particular learner at that particular context? And then third, so we move into the boxes at the bottom. So which is responding. Responding is asking what we might change in our teaching on the basis of what we have been noticed. And finally, reflection. So we have to reflect and ask what's happened when we tried out something, what we have learned from it, and then what we might need to reconsider. So this circular form is actually very important because it is not four isolated steps that we do. Right? What we learn through reflection may actually change, so what we are able to see and notice in the next time. Across the lecture, so which is later on, so I will unpack each part of this cycle and consider what it might mean for culturally responsive ELT and also for teacher professional development. So let's start with the first step. So we begin with seeing. So before teacher can respond differently, so they often see concepts that make previously invisible assumptions visible. So I will be using global Englishes, multilingualism, identity, and culture as four examples to illustrate. Global Englishes, so I think this term is not very unfamiliar to us. So for here, so actually this concept or this notion help us to question the assumption that English belongs to just one nation, one culture, or one idealized native speaker group. English could be used internationally because local varieties might present and it could be well established. And also, so communication can often involve multilingual speakers that adapting to one and another. And for teacher education, So the important point is not just about the different notions like okay, so English as an international language, world Englishes, English as a lingua franca, etc. The most important point here is about a pedagogical question that we ask. What kind of English that we are preparing our learners to use, with whom, and for what purpose? And the recent work on global Englishes, and particularly those on teacher education, suggests that okay, so a shift in teachers' beliefs and practice can actually help to resist beyond the initial courses, which makes it okay, so really relevant to professional learning. Challenge the assumptions. So we might be looking from a historical lens that what happens, okay, so to norms. So I think Karsh used circle again, okay, so I do think that is very familiar to many of us, remains a very useful one that we reconsider over. Because, okay, so in this circle, many of the countries has been categorized into inner circle, outer circle, and expanding circle, which they make an unequal norm authority visible. Some contexts, like those in inner circle, and usually, okay, so they are like English-speaking countries like the US or UK, and including Australia. So they are as norm providing. And the others, they could be like norm developing. For example, English might have an official status, okay, so, or as a gatekeeping language in that country. Or some of them might be, okay, so norm dependent. So the diagram here, okay, so understand that how English teaching has become and organized, okay, so geopolitically. And at the same time, as we have mentioned, so we shouldn't be treating this circle as a permanent map of people or countries because, okay, so actually speakers move and community changes as well. And also digital communication across national boundaries, okay, so happens more prominently, okay, so within different online interactions. And individuals actually draw upon multiple repertoires. So this module actually exposed the hierarchy that become restrictive, and also it freezes identity. So what is the implication to teaching right here? Is that many of the students, okay, so might be raising the issue that, hey, okay, so I want to, okay, so achieve some native like, okay, proficiency, okay, so here, okay, so, or, okay, so they would like to, okay, so, or they would like to achieve, okay, so like, okay, so they want to learn and speak like a native. So we need to challenge the assumptions and think over that indeed, okay, so what kind of, okay, competence that we would like to achieve or which models are useful and attainable for the learner, and when should be the conventional standard become important, or when, okay, so intellectuality, accommodation, or even rhetorical flexibility could be important. So put it short, okay, so is that when we are talking about culturally responsive ELT, it does not mean that we just let idea go or need anything go. It's that we select norms, okay, so in a careful manner and explain in relations to the purpose of learning rather than, okay, so we treat norms as an inherited, okay, so thing without questioning. So I also felt that because Indonesia is a very good place that we think over this issue. So, for example, English is also taught because in relations to local and national languages, and also together with the regional mobility, and together because with more international schools, because of tourism in higher education, and also with more digital communication and cross-country collaborations, okay, with different institutes internationally. So these purposes, okay, so what do we mean is, so it does not really point to just one, like a single English model right there. It requires teachers and lecturers to make transparent choices about what is being taught and why. So we understand the norms. We need to understand the assumptions behind the norms. So here are a couple of concepts that we can consider continuously. So when we are seeing English, English is never a neutral language. It is always come with power and access and also hierarchy and together with history. So English, for example, can operate as an economic and cultural capital. It could open pathway to access to education and employment. Um, but okay, so the access to high quality English learning could be uneven to many of the learners, and the value is attached to different kind of okay, so multilingualism or bilingualism is also unequal. So another example, just now we talk about the native speaker norms. So native speakerism is also a kind of the ideologies that we can consider over. So one of the example that how this kind of hierarchy is reproduced because it's essential for us to reflect on. Because when we're saying that, or when a learner is telling us that, hey, because I want to learn about the native speaker, because speaking norms, pronunciation, right? Actually, okay, so we need to question over or think over. Is it like we try to position an imagined native speaker, and often we associate with Western culture as an ideal teacher or even an ideal user of English? And if so, it might okay, so actually devalue the multilingual teachers and learners okay, in some way that actually they process rich communicative and pedagogical resources there. And then, okay, so again, materials and exams, institutional policies can reproduce the same hierarchy in some way. So on the one hand, we can celebrate diversities in the classroom, right? And then while we continue to reward only one accent, one rhetorical style, or one cultural framing. So an example could be like emphasis in Australian education system is about the standard Australian English. Okay, so as the kind of English that should be taught in the classroom, despite okay, so we celebrate multiculturalism or okay, so we talk about multicultural or culturally responsive pedagogies in classroom. So the point here is that we do not deny that English has got a material value. So still we need to consider the economic and cultural capital there. Right. But then the question further that we ask, okay, so in challenging the assumption is that who gains the access to it and whose English got recognized and whether teaching widen or narrow these kind of learners' possibilities. So moving on, okay, so what should we do? Okay, so after challenging the assumption, so destruction and construction. So the second assumption that or something that we can consider or build could be about identity. So for example, labels such as native or non-native, Asian learners, international students, local teachers, or native or English-speaking teachers can sometimes describe a broad social position, but they do not explain what a particular person will do in a particular classroom. So we might need to shaken a little bit about what we think about identity. Identity is and could be multiple, situated and also negotiated. So learners may position themselves differently across family, schools, online, or professional space. And their language choices indeed could express affiliation, resistance, expertise, or even aspiration. So therefore, so when we are looking into multilingual competence, so we shouldn't be treating it as an imperfect imitation of a monolingual competence, but indeed, because we just treasure it as a resources for navigating different contexts. So for culturally responsive ELT, our goal is to shift from producing a copy of idealized native speaker towards supporting intellectuality, agency, repertoire development, or making purposeful choices of using the language. So the same learner can be confident when they discuss familiar issues in the community, or they might be hesitating in unfamiliar academic genre. Okay, so or they might be playful online, or in a highly formal situation with a teacher. So when we are treating identity as situated, could be helpful for us to explain the differences through just nationality. It could also direct our attention towards how classroom design actually could expand or restrict such possible identities. So we turn into, so a broader lens right here, so about the second step that is noticing. So the critical awareness, so just now we talked about might not be enough. So teachers might need to find some fine-grained evidence about what learners are actually doing with the language and what kind of task is demanding there. And we'll be looking into one thing here, so which is the diagnostic, precision or prescription that we are trying to do. So which is teacher language awareness. So teacher language awareness or TLA requires a language teacher because that is qualitatively different because from the knowledge of just an educated language user, right? So it combines three perspectives there. So for example, the teachers need to knowledge about the language. So for example, okay, so simply said, it could be about vocabulary, grammar, discourse, phonology, or how pragmatic work. They also need to have the communicative ability so that this kind of knowledge can be mediated in interactions. And of course, they need to have the metacognitive reflection, the ability to examine the language choices in relation to the learner, to a text, or even to a pedagogical purpose. So this thing, okay, so actually matters to culturally, okay, so responsive education, because just the goodwill of implementing it in the classroom is not enough. Okay, so we need to make informed choices, and teachers must be able to interpret what the learners say and write. Okay, distinguish the actual language barrier from an unfamiliar interactional norms, decide what kind of feedback is useful, and shape the input without treating difference as automatically as an error. So, as such, teacher language awareness turn noticing into an informed professional act. So this kind of professional form of awareness also include the ability to explain rather than just merely perform the language. So, as such, a proficient speaker may know that the expression sounds natural, but a teacher needs to decide what features matter, how to represent it accessibly, and whether corrections is needed, and also how that decision connects with the teacher's community or learner's communicative purposes. Speaking of that, so let's so look at a familiar statement here. So right here in higher education, we often receive a criticism. So thinking about that, international students or particularly Asian students are really quiet, and particularly East Asian students. So this one sounds very culturally responsive. That we understand a particular learning style of a particular group of learner, but then so when we reflect critically about individual learners. So, so it might be a little bit too general to guide responsive teaching. And then, so it's too quickly to jump into a deficit assumption that quiet is a bad thing, communication, collaboration, make learning visible is a good thing. So, what the teacher should do, or can do, is that they can try to replace this kind of category with a couple of diagnostic questions before they reach up to a conclusion. So, some examples here on this slide. So, for example, what exactly the task requires the learner to do? Is the learner being quiet in the whole class interactions? But is it active in pairs in writing? So is there enough process time that we provide for the learners to think, and articulate the ideas? Or are the vocabulary genre or the expectations visible to the learner? They know what to do and how to do it. So does the disagreement threaten phase or relationships in the particular group so that so it enhances their anxiety in formulating and express their ideas? So if they really make a mistake in a classroom, for us, how do the teacher respond to an error? So how do we distinguish whether it is a slip, it is an error, or actually it's a mistake? And then, are there any legitimate way that we can participate? So other than just speaking immediately, speak up, stand up, so and also publicly. So putting all these questions together, so it is not like giving you a checklist or us a checklist that, hey, we need to do all in the classroom. But the key distinction here with these 6 questions is that, so between so inferences and evidence there. Culturally responsive teachers could remain open to cultural patterns, but they do not allow those patterns to so consolidate or falsify in a way to predetermine an individual. So they will collect evidence about the task, the interaction, about the learner before making the decision that which kind of support actually is needed. So we can, of course, okay, so apart from just us watching over the student, we can also invite the learners into this kind of inquiry. So rather than just making diagnosis about participation entirely from a teacher's perspective, we can ask students that which grouping could be helpful for them to think, what kind of things that they need, and then what form of feedback that they feel useful, and what prevent them from discussion. So responsiveness here, okay, so is that it include learning with learners, so not just learning about them. So just now, so in the seeing stage, we talk about assumptions, we talk about identity, right? So we are saying that we try not to look into our multilingual learners with a deficit mindset. So actually, how should we see our learners? And many of the things that they could bring into the classroom is not entirely visible. So one good thing to capture it is with this virtual school bag that they bring to school. What teachers should notice, okay, so is about the learner's funds of knowledge. So which is accumulated knowledge and skills that develop through household and communities, and then through a lot of different habits, experience, and even with their own talents and interests. So as we mentioned, this school bag image is really useful because it reminds us that the learners carry much more than just the formal school knowledge, not just academic English, or because not just about the speaking skills or listening skills, reading skills, or writing skills. So their virtual school bag actually contain many things there. Okay, so that could include work practice, community network, hobbies, digital practice, migration experience, or even cultural knowledge that could be invisible in conventional tests. So, for example, high school exit test, or goes IELTS, or other form of standardized assessment. So for us, so what should we do? A culturally responsive teacher, because we do not just simply ask learner to display their personal culture as a kind of decoration. A stronger move, because pedagogically, should be about using these resources as an entry point for concepts, texts, and tasks. So in an English class, learners might compare how a local community communication risk, explain the process, tell their family stories, negotiate respect, and also examine how those different meanings could be re-expressed or expressed to different English-speaking audience to explain about their experience in English. And this recognize that knowledge and also extend their repertoire. So most importantly, when we talk about the concept of funds of knowledge, it shouldn't be become another demand that the learners publicly need to disclose immediately about their personal and family experience. But as teacher, so we should consider offering multiple entry points right there and allow choices and option for students to demonstrate this kind of funds of knowledge. So the principle is to widen what count as resources while respecting privacy and also avoiding expectation that one student must represent the whole entire community. So as we mentioned, about the overrepresentation, overgeneralization, the teacher also need to re-examine or look into the concept that is called culture, right? Culture happens in a bigger and larger one and also smaller ones. So the large culture categorize something like nation, ethnicity, religion, or the language, right? It could illuminate history, institutes, or even unequal power, right? So they are also relevant to our learning. And also because the problem will come when they use and predict individual learners' behavior. But then because learning also happening in classroom, so there are smaller cultures and microcultures there. So smaller cultures and microcultures draw attention towards the practice developed within a particular group. So for example, in a class, in a friendship network, within a professional team, or even online communities. And this practice are dynamic and locally negotiated. So for teachers, the practical question becomes, what is that specific classroom, okay, so that we construct meaning, participation, and identity? So how do we, okay, so actually build that specific classroom? Right. So I just give an example here, okay, so in Australia. So for example, in Australia, so we do have EALD students. So the students, okay, so learn English as an additional language and dialect. And sometimes these students, okay, so will be put together with the mainstream students, okay, so to learn together with a specialist teacher supporting them, or with the specialist teacher co-teach with them, or sometimes they have got the strategy that they pull out those students to have a withdrawn group, small group to do some activities with the within the classroom or in another classroom. So there are so many choices right here. So what do we do? Okay, so as a practical question from this example is that, okay, so we're trying to look into that what specific, okay, so implementation could be helpful and useful for the students. Right. And then on the other hand, okay, so when we are looking into culture, so we also try to notice about the cultural patterns right here, without just assuming that every single student, be it, okay, so Indonesian one, okay, so Chinese one, Australian ones, or British one, that they learn all in the same way. So culture remains important, but then it becomes an inquiry, okay, so rather than the answer that we provide in advance. So this is very important when we look into culture, and particularly when we are talking about intercultural teaching. Okay, so here, because right now, okay, so we do know that, okay, so like cultural, okay, so cultural learning and also language learning, okay, so could be intertwined, okay, so in some way. So instead of, okay, so we are providing a fixed list of how one nation communicates or one kind of culture, that how they were like. Okay, so we can think over presenting different interpretations right here, asking and inviting students to think about, is it actually, okay, American will be naturally doing it in this way, right? And then we investigate the variations within groups, okay, so or across cultures, and invite students to clarify questions, okay, so and then thinking over these kind of assumptions or representation, and then what can they do, okay, so when they need to communicate interculturally. And intercultural competence, okay, so can become actually kind of curiosity, negotiation, or even reflexivity, rather than just memorizing a couple of cultural rules. In Australia, we say, in America, we say, right? But then we think about what is the best way, okay, so to make meaning across. So we talk a lot about, okay, so what we see and what we respond or what we notice, right? So we talk about actions now. So C provides the lens, just now what we look into the concepts. Notice provides evidence of individual learners. Responsiveness, okay, so now, okay, turns into the pedagogical decision and actions that we have to do. So to do the actions, okay, so of course, okay, so we need agentic, okay, so teachers there. So the response actually depends on teacher agency. So language teacher wants, okay, so commonly represent as the technician who apply the correct methods. So we take master, okay, so of education to learn different methods around communicative language teaching, audiolingual method, grammar translation. So, okay, so there are so many methods. So we might be thinking over, okay, so right now is that, so we make sure that we apply the method right. Right. It is not wrong, right? Of course, but classroom is very complex and dynamic, right? So we always need to read the room. So we need to think over that for this package of correct methods, we're not working as a technician that, okay, so we see a hole there, fix, okay, we see a hole there, fix, right? And then we shouldn't be looking into what's happening in the classroom as a simple set of cause and effect package right there. Instead, we do something a little bit more. We should interpret the curricula, the material and policies through a couple of things that we have. So first of all, our knowledge, our beliefs, our identity, and of course, our relationships with the learners. So agency. So right now, it's not saying something that is restrictive. And also, it is not unrestricted neither, right? It is a capacity that we try to make purposeful choices within the ecology of possibilities and constraints. And putting it into culturally responsive ELT is that So we do not do something one size fit all. So it is not saying that, hey, okay, CRT is the best, and then we have to apply it to the every single classroom. So we will be looking into how the demand develops, and then what the learning style the local students prefer, and what is the institutional expectations, assessment requirement, and also the community purpose, or even the parents' demand that, right? And then put it into professional learning for us is that so we are not just okay so making okay so a kind of compliant implementations okay so right there, right, but then okay so we are trying to develop the principled context sensitive adaptations that we can support enough knowledge and collaborations for us as a teacher and also a group of teachers to explain why a change could be educationally justified. So what we mean here, okay, so agency is not just individual, it could be collective. We have got the collective dimension of this agency. So when an individual teacher may find it, it's quite difficult to challenge an assessment norm, or okay, so looking into English only expectation alone, right? We could have collective judgment together, discussion, right? So when colleagues also examine the evidence together, trial alternatives, and develop shared language for explaining decisions. So culturally responsive changes could become possible and also less personally risky, but more institutionally sustainable. So here, okay, I try to also okay, so provide okay, so like at least 5 sites that we can think about redesigning some of our practice. So first of all is that we can look into the language norms that we saw just now. So we can think over which variety, which accent, which communicative goals are represented, and also how those conventional standards can be explained and communicate to the students. So second, we look at the materials and content. So we talk about the norms, okay, so it could be fixing the stereotype of one language, okay, so one language, one culture, and also, okay, so one representation, right? So we might be looking into, okay, so whose experience, knowledge, and image that appear, and what perspective actually is absent, right? And third, okay, so we will be looking into interactions and participation. So actually who speaks, okay, so within the text, communicating to us within the classroom, who speaks, right? And in which grouping that we speaks together. Okay, so and together, what is the preparation time and through which mode that we communicate. So we talk a lot about the preparation work and classroom interactions. So one really important concept in teacher education and also in classroom learning is talking about scaffolding. Okay, so we break down the tasks into some kind of digestible bites to students so that okay we can provide them some support to complete a task, and later on we gradually remove the support so that they could become independent learner to master the task. So right here for scaffolding, it could be the vocabulary, the genre, or the pragmatic explanation, or even like the disciplinary reasoning that we make visible to reduce the intellectual challenge. To put it into another technical term that is the cognitive load. So how can we make English language learning? Okay, so that is okay, suitable and placed within the zone of proximal learning of the learner without okay, so heavily increase the cognitive load and enhance their anxiety. So fifth is about assessment and feedback. So what counts as the successful communication there? Okay, so and what do the criteria, okay, so recognize purpose, okay, so and meaning making and growth works. So this site shows that how culturally responsive ELT is not just a single technique. So it is a pattern of linked decision across curriculum, teaching, and assessment. Right. And next is about another strategy. So another strategy, okay, so could be useful, could be translanguaging. Yeah. So when we are talking about translanguaging, it could be about the dynamic use of a multilingual speakers, integrated linguistic and semiotic repertoires. So in pedagogy, okay, so the word, okay, so could be purposeful right there. So with a particular purpose that they do. Right. So teachers can plan, okay, so when different languages or modes, okay, support comprehensions, knowledge construction, identity, and participation. So learner might also map the ideas into language that enable them to have the deepest thinking. Okay. And also compare key concepts across languages, consult multiple resources, and even rehearse with a peer, right? Then they produce English as a defined audience. So it is not just an uncontrolled translation happening. So it does and also it does not really require that, okay, so we abandon English development goals, right? The teacher remain explicit about the purpose of each language choice and also about eventual communication outcome. So here is that another, because of recent research remind us that teacher learning and also institutional support matters because translanguaging can remain, okay, so convert when teacher is via that multilingual pedagogy, okay, so will be judged as professional. Oh my God, okay, so the teacher is using, okay, so okay, so another language. Is it because, okay, so her or his English is not good enough, right? Or it might be that it's the parents complaining, hey, why they're using, okay, so another language in the English class shouldn't be having a lot of opportunities to use English there to learn English. So right here, we need a shared rationale developed across teachers, what they can use together with leaders, learners, and even with their family. So there are a couple of, okay, so useful planning questions. So for example, okay, so about the language choices. So which serve with which learning function, right? And then also what is the, for example, the role of the home language as well, right? So naming all those functions explicit could prevent translanguaging from, okay, so being looked as something being prohibited or unplanned. So putting it into another, okay, so, way is about the task redesign. So we just now talk about that, for example, a design of a, okay, so a task in the classroom could be first, okay, so we read the article independently, just like during reading comprehension, we read and then answer some questions, right? And then, okay, so if we are going to talk about that speaking, okay, so in a class, English class, okay, English only classroom there, right? Discuss only in English, right? And then each of us, okay, so when we need to talk 5 minutes presentation. So here, okay, so it may work for some students, right? But it also hides the background knowledge, genre, interaction, okay, so and also the language demand that we need. So a responsive redesign could include a couple of things here. So for example, we need to activate the knowledge through any useful language or mode there. So teacher can also model the genre and also the key vocabulary, provide discussion stamps or prompts, role or processing time for the student, right? And learners can also compare meaning across languages rather than treating translation as just a word substitute, right? And then they can also shape English for a particular audience or purposes. And finally, they can also have some chance to reflect on this participation. So rich resources could be helpful for them to communicate. And where does the meaning, okay, so become difficult? So overall, right here, okay, so the academic goal has not been lowered, right? But in fact, the reasoning may become actually more demanding because the changes is about the access, right? The learners are given pathway to mobilize what they know, okay, so while extending their English repertoire. So the final cycle right here is about reflection. So for this part is that turning an individual response into professional learning. So reflection is not just about how do I feel about the class, but it is an inquiry to what's happened and also what should be done next. Yeah, reflection should be just more than a feeling, right? And it's not just about, oh, okay, so what I feel about it does well and badly. Shun and also other tastes of reflection scholarship position it as a kind of systematic inquiry into practice. So practitioners need to inquire about uncertain situation rather than just applying rules. So they need to also use evidence, okay, so to see like what works and what doesn't work. So the aim here is that we don't because look at ourselves with a deficit lens, but then the aim is to provide that because a way to reflect whether our preferred strategy work or not, right? And then what can we do to investigate the consequences if it works or doesn't work, right? And what kind of work that okay, so we need to keep, and then what kind of work that we have to do to repair. So the strongest way is not that we just do it alone, right? So when we talk about collect evidence, and then we might be inviting other teachers to question, okay, the actions together, and then we look into the assumption and context in reproducing them. So here, okay, so I would also like to give another example, right? So another example here is that we can use evidence, including learners' talk and writing, because the patterns of participation. So for example, okay, so like the duration of teachers' talk, okay, so the students giving feedback to teacher, the student and student interactions. Okay, so we use observational record right there to record like the time and chances of interactions, the assessment work, the learners' feedback. So neither they give it to their peers, okay, so or they reflect on their own task, and also might be we invite another colleague for okay, so lesson observation for their interpretation of the lesson. So the aim here is that, okay, so we try to investigate, okay, so the consequences right here to inform the next actions. So to sum it up, okay, so that what kind of questions that we can ask or guide this kind of professional learning, okay, so collectively is that, so we can think about, for example, in a classroom, who gain the access of voice. So would it be like a particular student, okay, so a particular group that dominating? Okay, would it be like, okay, so anything remain marginalized or silenced, right? So for example, some students might need more needs about content or about the language. So what kind of assumptions did the evidence confirm, complicates, or even overturn, right? And then most importantly is that it is actionable. So what is the next, okay, so small adaptations that we can do in a transformative classroom? So here, okay, so is that we can notice something, okay, so about turn taking, okay, so about how language has been corrected, right? And then the reflection will only become stronger when we can connect to the next action of, okay, so teaching, right? And then, okay, so one reminder is that, okay, so teachers may need several sources of evidence and also learner perspective here. Right. So the purpose is that, okay, so we try to ensure that, okay, so some of the evidence are not overly interpreted. Silence do not really automatically, okay, transfer into disengagement, okay, so or like, okay, so improficient in a particular language. But then, okay, so we will be understanding the patterns over time. So speaking of that, okay, so we come back to the CR capacity that we talked about at the very beginning. Okay, so that why awareness, okay, so are not usually okay, so translated automatically into practice. So this explain a little bit why. Right, a teacher may still value about multilingualism, as we mentioned earlier, okay, so in this presentation, but still reinforcing English, okay, so only interactions. A teacher may also reject native speakerism, but still using assessment that build around one idealized standard. A teacher may also okay, so value participation in a way okay, so that could be expecting rapid okay, so questioning and rapid okay, so, answering. So the gap could be mediated by the belief and professional identity, right? And also it could be okay, so mediated by exams, textbook, okay, so even like policies and time, leadership, okay, so and also work together, we evaluate and assess the professional risk. Right. And the global okay, English research also telling us that teacher education can produce this kind of shift and belief over time. But then this kind of shift couldn't be just happen just one click, okay, so in 2 hours, but then it is like a gradual shift right there, right? And then also the identity-oriented professional development could be also, okay, so showing the value to connect, okay, so new pedagogical knowledge to teachers' role, emotions, and tensions. So the implication here is that professional development, okay, so must work together with the concept, the practice, and the conditions together. So that's why I always felt that blaming the teachers of okay, so being not culturally responsive, okay, so, or not doing a good job is unhelpful. Might be the teacher is already working a lot, okay, so within the high stake test, the prescribed textbook, large class size, and expectations from parents and also leaders. So what actually PL or professional development can do is that okay, so we give a protected space for the teacher to examine this constraint honestly and identify the changes that they can do, which is principled, informed by research, and also feasible and workable in the classroom, while Okay, so collectively we consider the needs about what is the demand, okay, so from the institution or even the accreditation authority. So going back to our model, because of the integrated model that we have, okay, at the beginning, when we talk about the 4 steps. So what should we do? Okay, so yeah, so culturally responsive teaching, okay, so and particularly in a ELT space, is a continuous cycle rather than just a one-off strategy. So it begins with seeing right here. Teachers first consider the assumptions, expectations, and the power belief about languages and learners that shape their interpretations about the classroom situations, learners, and language. So second, from there, so we go into individuals. So they notice what is actually happened for a particular learner, looking into closely about their language use by having our teacher language awareness, how they participate, the needs and the resources that they need, rather than relying on general assumptions. So third, actions, respond. We use the evidence that we collect, okay, so to understand and make a pedagogical decision right there. So for example, we adapt the language, we scaffold, okay, so in the class, we adapt the materials, we implement different ways of interactions, or even do adaptations towards multiple forms of assessment. Fourth, reflection. So on what's happening, okay, so after this is that making a pedagogical decision, work it out in the classroom. So we think about what works, okay, so who was supported in the classroom, what remains to be challenging, and what can be done next. So the important here is that reflection is not the ending point of this process. So reflection actually shapes and determines what we are able to see in the next step when we enter into the classroom. And the cycle begins again to become a more informed professional lens. So overall, I know that I really talk a lot, okay, so but I will end with 3 takeaways, okay, so today. So first of all, culturally responsive ELT is one orientation right there. It's not a checklist. So it asks teachers to value learners' resources and enable equity or equitable access and also challenge for taking for granted norms. So second, okay, so 4 professional actions that we just talked about the cycle. Okay, so right there. Critical seeing, precise noticing, context sensitive response, and also evidence informed reflection. And okay, so the third one cycle. Okay, so professional development must sustain that cycle in teachers' real context. It connects concepts with learners, classroom evidence, collaboration, identity, and agency. So, my final message is that culturally responsive teaching is not something that teachers simply know, right? It's that something that they need to see, notice, okay, so, respond, and continuously reflect and refine and practice. And okay, so thank you very much, okay, so for today. And here is the reference list that okay, so we have okay, so for the presentation of today. And okay, yeah, okay, so terima kasih, okay, so and thank you very much, okay, so and okay, so I just give the time back to Susie, okay, so and welcome any questions and discussion, okay, so around.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Tanya Kwee, for the materials. It's very useful for us as a teacher in developing our class in future. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's give a virtual applause to Dr. Tanya Kwee. And now we open questions and answer sessions. Please raise your hand or your virtual hand if you have any questions to her. Don't forget to mention your name first before the questions. Like we open 3 questions for this session.
Yes.
Yes, please, Ma'am Winnie.
Hi, Tanya. Thank you very much for sharing a very insightful session. So glad to hear from you again. So, yeah, I think it's very interesting talking about this culturally responsive teaching. And yeah, I think I agree with you about um yeah, I think it's quite tricky when we try to be culturally responsive without being stereotyping, right? Yeah, and then you mentioned about how we observe our learners, like particular learners, like learn about, yeah, about their language, what they need. But it sounds a lot of work, like we have to take a look at each student individually and then learn about them. Like, do you have any practical suggestion on how to do that? Especially in our classrooms here, we have like 40 students in one classroom, like very different from Australian schools, I believe. So yeah, do you have any suggestion for uh practicality? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Because I understand that. Okay, so like it's really hard to manage like 40-ish students. So I remember the days that when I was teaching in Hong Kong, so 40 students, because 43 students in a classroom, and then so not to talk about marking that we want to cry. Okay, so, but then okay, so also noticing and then making them okay, so participate. Okay, so could be really hard. So I think first thing first. Okay, so if they have got some kind of entrance test, okay, so or some kind of assessment data, okay, so it could be a useful starting point to design and devise of something that we can start working with. So for example, like in Australian context, so they do have like NAPLAN, the National Test of Literacy in like year 3, 5, 7, and 9, right? And this is a very good okay, so assessment data that we can use okay, so to look into that particular of student that generally what do they need, right? And then for example, some of the particular learners that we would like to focus a little bit more on, and then we can give them a little bit more individual support. So I do think that this kind of baseline data could be useful for us to package and support like most of the learners okay, so within a classroom. And then starting from there, okay, so and then we start the cycle and then we do some small changes around because it's very hard to like okay, so let's do all the discourse analysis okay, so of all the learners okay, so at the same time okay, so I do think that everyone will cry here, right? But then we can start with the assessment data as a baseline okay, so to have a little design first, and then okay, so we add in small elements and changes throughout our teaching and learning cycle.
Right, yeah. I think that's a very good point because I think like in the past a few years we didn't have that kind of national assessment, but starting from last year, we started to have this kind of national assessment. I think that's a very good point as a baseline data. Okay, thank you very much, Tanya.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to see you again too, sister.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Wendy, for the questions, and thank you so much, Ms. Tanya, for the response. Is there any questions, ladies and gentlemen, from our new students, maybe?
Me?
Oh,
Suchi?
yes, Ma'am Kasmaini, please.
Okay. Thank you for the chance, Suchi. And welcome, Miss Tanya. Yeah. Okay. I'm delighted to to have you here with the cultural responsive in our English language teaching. My question is, if we are talking about cultural responsive, if the class not homogeneous or heterogeneous cultural background, how many percent that we can accept the cultural differences among the students? For instance, here in our English study program, we are going to have from Pakistan students. Yeah, we know that we have different culture with the Bengkulu student. Now, how could we handle, especially later on in assessment? Maybe in the classroom activity, I imagine now that the Pakistan student may use as the what they call the person who can help the student, Bengkulu student in speaking ability, for instance. But in assessing them, we know that they have different culture, they have different habit in learning. Now, how could we handle this? Because it is not a homogeneous context. It is a heterogeneous context. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. It is a very good question. Okay, so Kasmani, because I hope that I pronounced it
Kasmaini.
Kasmani, because I hope
Yeah.
that okay, the Kasmani, okay, which is a very good question. That okay, when we are facing a huge okay, the cultural and linguistic diversity, I try to see. Is my screen still sharing, or okay, so should I be like putting it away? Hi, Susie. Okay, so is my
You see?
screen sharing right now, or is gone?
No,
Yeah.
yes,
Yes,
your
yes.
screen share is
It's
gone.
cool.
It's gone
Uh,
already.
oh, good. Okay, so great. Okay, so let me know. Okay, so if there is anything wrong with the audio and video, because sometimes okay, so tech is not with me. I think okay, so Dr. Fernandez, I know that sometimes technology really hates me. Right. And so going back, okay, so to the question, indeed, okay, so when we are looking into heterogeneous group of learners, okay, so it is very hard. So for example, okay, so in some of the Australian classrooms, so we have got like more than okay, so like 20 okay so like ethnic okay so groups okay so of students they are here okay so and it is very challenging okay so to design a task that could be like openly suitable for them, right? So I just give one example. So I recently observed a class which is a year okay so which is a year 3 class, so which is okay so talking about how to write stories okay so that, and then the teacher okay was trying to use okay so a picture with dragon okay so right there to talk about a very creative story with adventure, right? But we do know, for example, dragon has got different cultural implications right there, right?
Yeah.
So for example okay so in my culture dragon is something pretty lucky okay so but then in some cultures they could be demonized in some way. So what can teacher do okay so when we reflect on that student teacher's lesson, apart from okay so just giving a fixed set of norms, so they can give them like a couple of pictures that they could select okay so indeed that can suitable for them to demonstrate their ability the best. So I think that could be like one way that they can respond to the task okay so, and fulfill some kind of requirement, but then there are some flexibility that they could provide their own input in response to that, right? And then on the other hand okay so I think about like different communicative norms that you mentioned across different culture. So how do we know and assess the student? Avoid okay, so using just a standardized norms to benchmark across different groups. So I think one of the things that we can do, okay, so is that because we might be okay so breaking down things into okay so process okay, or we could have like okay so different kinds of assessments around. So apart from just like benchmarking the final assessment with some specific okay so norms there, so for example how they develop that okay so in the process okay so how they communicate okay so and then together okay so might be with the script writing. So when we're breaking it down okay so into multifocal points there, so it could be better address okay so the issues instead of like cram all together okay so with just one single assessment that need to fit all the requirements together.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yes, that,
It is
yeah, thank
just like a generic medicine, yeah, one for all. So there is no
yeah,
one for
true.
all. So, okay.
I think
Thank you,
also
Tanya.
right, yeah, thank you. Okay, so just adding on, okay, so at one point is that right now, okay, so we also consider a lot about like multi forms, okay, so or multi modes of assessment, okay, across the curriculum. So for example, we do have presentations, we do have writing
Yes.
essays, creative writing, okay, so and also okay, so we might have the paper and pen exam. So that is like a multiple way that we can like honor different students' learning style or communicative style as well.
Thank you, Tanya.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Kaimani, Kasmaini, and Ms. Tanya for the questions and the response. And one last question, so ladies and gentlemen. One last questions. Who's talking? One last questions. Oh, okay, please, maybe it's
Okay, thank you, Tanya, for your so nice presentation. And it is insightful for us. If I'm not mistaken, previously you said and talk about translanguaging, right? You said that translanguaging can be one of the technique or method can be used by the teachers when they are going to create or design culturally responsive English language teaching. And then I think I need a little bit explanation on this because I think when the teachers use translanguaging so much, so that the students will, it can decrease the exposure for the student, English exposure for the students. What do you think about this?
A very good question. So actually, okay, so translanguaging, okay, so has been always, okay, so criticized in some of the, okay, so educational context that if we are using, okay, so for example, okay, so our L1 too much, okay, so does it mean that, okay, we take away the chance for a student to practice the target language? So that's why I think it comes to the point that we use it purposefully in some way. So for example, if we found that there is some part that it could be facilitating, okay, so an engaged student with, okay, so deep learning, okay, so it might be useful. So some of the strategies, okay, so for example, for some of our undergraduate pre-service teacher has been using in designing the literacy support, okay, so in content learning in their subject, content and language learning in their subject area. So it could be a part that is about, okay, so like translation or bilingual, okay, so a glossary list right there. So to provide them the input. So some of them might design that a specific, okay, so area, okay, so right there that they could discuss with their peers, okay, so in the L1. So they make some specific, okay, so groupings right there that for that particular part, they can do it. Right. And then, okay, so, but on the other hand, okay, so when they are like doing and reporting some of the assessments, so for some of the part, they have to recast and formulate it in English, right? And it depends on actually how, okay, so it designed at different stage that we use the strategy. So overall is that, okay, so we are not saying that, oh, okay, so like, okay, so English is just the end product, okay, so that, okay, so you need to demonstrate. But then, okay, so at different time point is that how actually it could support, okay, so the student, okay, so to, okay, so draw a point and understand the concept. Okay, so right there. And on the other hand, they feel safe in the English language classroom. That they felt that, oh, okay, so even though, okay, so I might not know that particular English term in saying that, so I can be, okay, so I am able to, for example, use it in my L1 to talk about that, or might be later on, okay, so I can explain, I can use some strategies to explain it. So for example, I use some longer chain of words to explain in English and eventually understand the terms. So I will be saying that it is like a procedural part that, okay, so we gradually implement to attain the goal right there.
Okay, got a point. So the teacher just to manage the time effectively, right?
Yeah, and also, okay, so use it purposefully, okay, so as well.
Okay, thank you so
Yeah,
much.
yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you, Ted.
Thank you so much, Ma'am Is and Ms. Tanya. Before we close the stations, as the representative of committee, I would like to present this certificate to you as a token of our gratitude for sharing such valuable material with us today. Thank you very much, Ms. Tanya, for being
Thank
here with
you.
us today. Ladies and gentlemen, before closing this event, I would like to ask you to open the Zoom camera because we will take a documentations with Miss Tanya.
Thank you. And also
Please
thank you for
open
the
your Zoom
opportunity.
camera. Yes, I want to
Yeah.
take a screenshot. Please
Photo.
open the Zoom camera first. Yes, photo.
Ayo foto, ayo foto.
Okay, please open the Zoom camera. We will start from the first slide. Oh, Mr. Amanzuri with sunglasses. Okay, what? Smile in 1, 2, 3. The next slide, smile in 1, 2, 3. The last slide, smile in one. Oh, wait a second. Wait a second. There's a problem with my laptop. 1, 2, 3. Yes. Thank you so much, Miss Tanya, for the information that you shared to us today. I'm sorry, my laptop is unstable. Okay. Oh, my connection is unstable. Am I audible?
Yeah,
Check,
you're
check.
good.
Yes. Okay, uh, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of today's public lecture, international guest lecture. On behalf of the organizing committee, I would like to sincerely thanks to Dr. Tanya Kwee for sharing her valuable knowledge and experience with us today. We also thank to all participants for your time, attention, and active participation throughout the section. Thank you so much, Miss Tanya. Have a good day and see you next time.
So
Can we
thank
have
you too.
Yes, can we have other file of your presentations after this?
Oh yeah, sure. Okay, so I can send it to you. Okay, so thank you so much.
And thank
Yeah,
you, Dr.
thank
Tanya.
you. Thank you too. Okay, so have a good one. Okay, so see you all very
Thanks,
soon and
sis.
visit
Bye.
the beautiful city. Okay, so see you. Bye.
Bye. Thank you
Bye.
so much.
So, ladies and gentlemen, our agenda is not ended yet. After this, we will have like opening lecture or the first meeting of lecture, ma'am, and we will divide it.
lesson plan.
Yeah, we will divide it the Zoom meeting into two breakout room. For the first breakout room, the PIC will be Ma'am Kasmaini, and the second breakout room, the PIC will be Ma'am Ira. The first
But
breakout room for the
okay,
first semester.
okay, Suci
Yes,
now.
I
But
will handle it to Ma'am
before
Is.
you come to the big courtroom, you will stay here because I have some information regarding the academic rules before you come to the big courtroom. So for the participant outside of University of Bengkulu or Master Program of English Language Education, it is kindly to ask you to leave this Zoom. Ya, silahkan untuk Bapak Ibu yang bukan dari S2 Bahasa Inggris atau mungkin Bapak Ibu alumni, terima kasih banyak sudah hadir. Dan juga mungkin dari beberapa tamu undangan boleh meninggalkan ruang Zoom karena kuliah umumnya sudah selesai akan kami gunakan untuk perkuliahan di S2 Bahasa Inggris. Terima kasih banyak. Ada Ibu Ajeng, Ibu Depi, ada Bapak Sayid, Ibu Nurul, dan lain sebagainya. Terima kasih banyak atas kehadirannya. Pak Mardi Juansah, thank you so much. Ya, kita menunggu partisipan dari outside of S2 Bahasa Inggris untuk keluar ya, Suci. Nanti kita akan mulai berikutnya.